Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be today. Thank you for joining me. I'm Jim Tolles. I'm a spiritual teacher, as many of you know. I offer these talks, I do one-on-one Skype sessions, and I blog regularly at spiritualawakeningprocess.com. Today we're going to talk about self-care during a spiritual awakening, and I'll offer my usual thoughts about awakening and hopefully some useful insights as you find your way through this type of transformation. You can type questions to me in the chat pod on the right, and I just encourage everyone to be respectful to each other and to me, and to primarily keep the conversations directed to me. It's a small space, so I don't want to miss people's comments, and I will respond intuitively. So if I don't respond, I'm just not intuitively guided. It works that way. That's part of learning to speak your truth. A lot of how people are taught to speak is all based off of social conditioning and trying to be accepted or pleased or a whole variety of different issues, which I encourage you to investigate. Next week's new blog post is about spiritual work, and that'll talk a little bit more to help kind of define that term, which really is just a term for letting go of ego attachments. And we usually start off working on the stuff we want to get rid of. And there are a lot of beliefs to let go of. Welcome, Greg and Paul. We have Colorado, South Africa. Adrian is from Ireland. If anybody else feels like sharing where you are, nothing too specific, just maybe the state or the country. If you're in a big country like the US, it helps to share the state just because it is so big. But in the smaller ones, you don't have to get that specific. And of course, you don't have to. I usually free flow for about the first 20, 30, sometimes 40 minutes. And during that time, I don't necessarily respond to questions or comments. So just know that I'll get to that after I've gone through this sort of flow of whatever I feel guided to share. And then the last half, I get into everybody's questions. So if you have a question midway through and I'm not answering them, you can always write it down and then type it in later, or you can type it in then and I'll try to get back to it. Welcome, Helsinki in Finland. And I usually take a few minutes here to let people log on before getting into the talk. So as you're settling in, I invite you just take a few deep breaths, give yourself a chance to be here. Let your mind relax, letting go of the past, letting go of the future. And take a few deep breaths. This week's new topic on the blog was about breathwork, and there are all kinds of breathwork, but I tend to keep it very simple. I like to work with people on the rest side of the spectrum, right? The human being is built up of kind of two main ways of engaging with life. We have kind of the rest, and we have the action. This is nothing new to any of you. However, with our breath, we can engage with those different things to work through issues and attachments and to get to know ourselves better. So I tend to use more the rest. So not any sort of intense breathing, just gently breathing in and starting to pay attention to your body, paying attention to where you're holding tension right now, paying attention to where you're open. How our body feels really does impact a lot of how we think and how we act. The more relaxed we are, the more open we are to each other, to ourselves, to life itself. On that note, let's get started talking about spiritual self-care during awakening. And I kind of want to start with making a distinction between self-care and self-work. On this path, there are times when we actively go looking for issues or actively moving through issues, and those ask for different types of spiritual tools. I was just mentioning breathwork. So for example, if you want to start to move some energy, start to draw some things up into your awareness, doing some more active breathing, these different techniques in the Kundalini tradition and other traditions can be very powerful. And this is now work. You're looking for something, you're opening yourself, you're experiencing things differently, and you're going to have to process those different experiences and get your bearings on what the different sensations, images, feelings all mean. And as you do that, you become more aware of yourself and what's going on inside. The whole self-work really is another way of saying know thyself, self-inquiry, all these other terms that many of you who have been on the spiritual path are more than a little familiar with, I'm sure. And we look for different tools to help us process through all those things. And then there's a time for rest. As I was mentioning with the breath and how much I talk about it being important to use resting breath to settle ourselves, to balance ourselves, to calm ourselves, to find that stabilized foundation inside of ourselves. Throughout all this, the most stable foundation, of course, is pure awareness, which is never up nor down. But let's not forget the body. I sometimes think that some of these spiritual traditions are forgetting the body, like it doesn't count. And of course it does. Everything is embraced. And if we say everything, we mean everything. And that absolutely includes our body. If somebody's too unstable in their body, they're not going to want to do more spiritual work. And this is a big problem with awakening, because most people awaken and they're not prepared. And I'm very specific about awakening, as anybody who has listened to me knows. And you can go to spiritualawakeningprocess.com and you can find what is a spiritual awakening to find a more complete definition that I offer. In short, it's a sustained internal movement towards union. So that sustained internal is the key parts, that it's not something that we do. Like once you open that gateway, it moves on its own. Most of what people call are on the conscious path, but in one, you have to choose to do the work. Otherwise, people will just plateau. They will stay in their thinking patterns. They will stay in their emotional patterns, their activity patterns for the most part. Without a serious push of some kind, without serious dedication, most people don't really go very far. And a lot of their goals in the spiritual path are corrupted by the ego. And the ego, of course, wants to feel good all the time and to be safe and to be happy, to find purpose and all these different things that really aren't about freedom. When awakening comes and it starts moving through somebody, it's basically a 24/7 thing. So it has often little to do with whether somebody wants it. And they have to choose it. And so this is the convergence that it doesn't matter if you've had what I call awakening or not. But what does matter is the choice to say, I'm going to choose. And so this is the combining of the two paths, to choose to go within. So if you had an awakening, maybe you weren't even spiritual, and you're like, how do I get out of this? I would say you're going to have to choose it instead. Getting out of it will cause you more suffering as you hold on. And if you haven't had an awakening in the way I described, dedication is vital. It's absolutely vital. If you are not dedicated, you will stop. You will stop moving. It will just settle. And this includes the people who are very highly sensitive. Their idea of movement is not what I'm calling movement. It's not a movement towards the divine. It's more like a leaf being blown about in the breeze, or a piece of wood on the ocean that's being tossed about. It has no real direction in itself. So for the highly sensitive people, being around sometimes an energy like my own feels great. And they're just like, I want to stay around this guy forever because they feel so much. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're choosing a particular direction, a particular way of growing. But they can. And when somebody is highly sensitive, it makes it easier to feel issues inside themselves and to work on them and to draw them up. So it's like any sort of experience or skill set. It has a double edge to it, depending on how you use it. And I definitely emphasize all my highly sensitive friends here today. Doing inner work is vital because then it makes it easier for you to be with all the craziness that goes on in the world rather than to run from it, seclude from it, create 5 million energetic barriers to it, right? And whenever we're creating barriers, there's more separation, which tends to cause more fear, more confusion. In short, there's a lot of ways people come to the spiritual path. But the spiritual care that we do with that is all about helping us to travel through it mindfully and consciously, travel through it with our best ability to be balanced even as we're deconstructing, because that's the primary work that most people are going to do. It's going to be around deconstruction. or resolving and removing things that are in the way of the truth of who we are. This is not an adding to path. We don't add to the perfection that we already are. And there's a lot to learn about what is perfection. For the ego, that just means that it's going to get all the things it wants, like I mentioned before. But really, perfection is accepting everything as is. And sometimes I'll define that as love. That's it. It's really simple. But then that forces you to reckon with how many things you don't like about yourself and about others. It forces you to reckon with the amount of pain and cruelty in this world. Now we can just think about the pain of disease. Right? That's nobody's fault. That has nothing to do with our egos. Right? There's just a lot of disease. It's been there for as long as humanity has been here, as far as I know. How do we come to be at peace with that? Well, we do inner work. And through this inner work, we come back to spiritual care. Because there are times to go within, and then there are times to let things settle. And actually, those times can be more extensive. It's like not constantly working to get somewhere. Right? This is another ego idea. And I'm sure there's a couple spiritual workaholics in my viewing today. It's okay. But we need times to settle, times to rest. And as you pay attention to yourself more, you may start to realize there are certain times during a year that you need to rest, to let things kind of calm down. There'll be other times when you're just more energized and there's more of that push to go inwards. As you pay attention to yourself, you'll start to notice these pushes, so sort of push to come inside, and then there's going to be kind of this letting go of that and an interest in going back outside, and you start to kind of find this ebb and flow. We're wonderfully intelligent beings. And so much of inner work is starting to listen to that intelligence. And self-care is the same way of learning to listen. The problem of not doing self-care well or properly or at all is that people get really imbalanced. And a lot of inner work is inherently imbalancing if we're breaking things down, this sort of spiritual destruction, right? But in a good way. Like we don't appreciate that some things need to die. We kind of, I think, in the Western culture, have gotten into this illusion of the eternal, eternally young, eternally healthy. And that's not how it is. Some things have to be broken down to make space for something new. And that stirs a lot of things up. And we got to give space for the time or for the dust to settle. And there are really key places that we want to work with our self-care, and it's going to start with the body. It's going to be very basic. It's going to be stuff that all of you already know about, but we want to make sure there's no ideology mixed into it. For instance, food right now, unfortunately, has gotten really enmeshed with a lot of ideology. Ideology is simply applying an idea about what's right to eat rather than listening to your body to understand what is appropriate for you. So I'm really concerned about some of these different ways of eating and different styles of eating that people are thinking is spiritual, because what we really want is for you to be healthy, to be balanced. And there's a lot of different ideas going in there that has to be kind of peeled away, because some people, I have, been given stories, really got themselves imbalanced because they were eating too inappropriately for themselves, or they're trying to overcompensate, or they're trying to fix a lack that doesn't exist. It's kind of like, if somebody just decided to eat tons of bananas, it's like, I need more and more potassium. It's like, is that what your body really is telling you? And, if somebody creates a diet today about that and says that it's the banana spiritual diet, and somebody's going to be doing it and overdosing on potassium somehow. And so that's not what we need to do. In the spiritual self-care that we want to work with is to make space for us to be as solid and nourished as possible. Because the body does get upset in these processes, partially because our ego is getting upset. It's like, oh my gosh, what's all this stuff happening inside me? Why am I remembering these issues with my mother when I was 5 years old? Or, why is this whole trauma coming back when I was 13? I thought I was done with that, right? These types of things trigger the ego. And of course, when the ego is triggered, we have fearful responses, clenching in the body, different things that happen to our stomachs, our backs, all these just different replies where we're getting upset, we're hitting our fight or flight mechanism. That makes it really important to be eating well. And maybe sometimes if you're early in your path that the eating is going to be part of your self-care and your self-work, it's all right to have that be muddy at first. Because unfortunately, a lot of Westerners have learned how to eat very poorly. I know I wasn't eating particularly well 10 years ago. I was absolutely not eating enough vegetables. Now it's absurd to me that, I wasn't. I understand how I got to that point and why. But eating those types of things that are natural to the body, is very grounding and stabilizing. Sleep. Sleep can be an interesting one too. I know many people have sleep disruption because they've got a lot of energy, because their ego is being really triggered, and so it's getting hard to relax enough to sleep properly. And there's a lot of things that go with it. And so sometimes sleep and meditation can go hand in hand, and meditation can be a form of rest. So what I'm speaking to on a larger scale is just getting enough rest. It can be hard if you're on like an energy surge going late at night to calm yourself down, but that should be part of your practice too, because you're going to need rest to help stabilize and help the body regulate itself for other times when things are coming up in different ways that it's going to need more attention. I know this is really basic, but this is where we're going to lay the foundation of self-care. If the body is disrupted and if the body is not happy, everything else is going to be disrupted. The way we think, the way we feel, all the energetic stuff is going to be even more confusing. And just talking about this can be a challenge when we're going through a lot of interchange. And that's okay. It's okay to be challenged. It's okay for things to not be perfect. Water is definitely important. A lot of people don't drink enough water. I don't know what the right amount is for you. I'm not going to prescribe any particular amount. But all I can say is that it's important to drink water. That's just part of what the human being is. Helps flush out toxins. We don't want to overdo it and we don't want to underdo it. So this balance is an important part of the human body. When the body gets in balance, everything gets harder. Circling back to what I mentioned at the very beginning around breathing, and breathing is very helpful, right? To come into a better regulation of your circulation. Breathing in, breathing out, trying to match the breath. So there's a certain balance in the inhale and the exhale from time to time. It doesn't have to be extensive. But you'll notice at times like your breath may disappear, particularly as you're getting upset. And by that, I mean it gets shallower and shallower. And now you're only breathing about to here. And it's like you're hyperventilating. Some people, their resting breath is very, very poor. And I emphasize again and again, it's like, this is important to like relax down. Do some sort of breath work or learn about it. That may become part of self-work again. Particularly at the beginning, if we don't have the proper foundation for deep inner work, we need to build one. And what can be frustrating for those of you at a spontaneous awakening is you never built one, but now all this stuff is happening. So you kind of have to build in front of the train, right? The train is coming and you're still laying down more tracks. Well, this happens. It's okay. Hopefully this talk and all the other videos on my channel, which is just under Jim Tolles, and my blog, can help you lay down those tracks so that you can take care of yourself. Building this foundation then can lead us into discussions around other things that we need to develop. So meditation can be extremely nourishing and calming. It's a wonderful thing, as science is now helping prove, for long-term mental health, generally feeling good about ourselves. It's a great practice in being aware of our thoughts when things are relatively easy. To be sure, some people, meditation is their self-work, because the minute they sit, a whole bunch of fear starts coming up, and so then that's what they have to do for their self-work, and they may want to find something else that's restful for them. This is part of knowing yourself. Journaling can be the same way, where sometimes that's a self-work thing, and sometimes you're just doing it more as a self-care to kind of finish processing something else that's moved through that you didn't really understand, or some situation that came up recently. The ability to process, and process just means being with all the emotions and thoughts that come from a situation, and let that situation be neutralized so there's no emotional charge to it. This process of processing will help you throughout the rest of your life so that you're not creating new issues that you hold on to that further cultivate your ego in certain ways. See, we're trying to stop that development, the development of the ego, which over time just ends up being more and more scared and threatened by life and by other people, and mired in its own ideas and stuck in emotions of all kinds. It's not free. It's just a cage that gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So when we start processing the different things that come up, we can stop adding new issues inside of ourselves, and we can start digging out the original ones. Some of that digging out will require change, actively changing things in your life. And I talk about this in some of my other posts and some of my other videos about making major life changes. And there's ways that you do that. Sometimes, there are people who are doing it too soon, and there are other people know there are changes they have to make and need to do them now. Once again, it's very individual. And if you can embrace that, this becomes really empowering, because the more you know yourself, the more you know what actions, what tools to use, and the clearer you are in yourself, the clearer it is when to ask for help. You do start to get better senses of things you don't know about yourself, of when you need support. When somebody's too disempowered, they kind of cut a couple ways. One of which, of course, is the victim, right? And the victim wants other people to save him or her. Another way is like this total individual, right? Because we have this Western society that is idealizing individuality. And the total individual says, nope, I can do it all myself. I don't need anything. I have to do it myself, or whatever. And so it skews this whole concept of, we do have to choose to go within it. That is our choice. It's our choice to be dedicated. That's true. Doesn't mean we don't benefit from help. So when we go within, we find ourselves becoming more empowered, knowing that when there are things that we run up against, like, and I need support. And other times where it's like, I need to be with this myself. Like, no one can do that for me. And that becomes part of that dance of self-care, of asking for help. Some of my sessions, I'm not necessarily working with people so much as I can be stabilizing or offering a certain kind of self-care. I usually prefer to be on the work side of things with people, because I can help people find stuff they can't find on their own. But at times, when somebody's come, they're really upset and really triggered, then that's what we do. We stabilize, help to calm the energy, give them that foundation back. Because if somebody's too unstable, they're not going to process things. That's why self-care is so important. They're not going to process, or you're not going to process, if you're too upset, if things are too muddied, and if you can't get your brain wrapped around what's going on emotionally or intellectually or physically or whatever's actually happening to go towards it and to really help resolve it and release it, surrender to it. In some regards, the spiritual path is like running into battle just to immediately throw down your weapons, throw down your armor, and wave the white flag, say, I surrender, I surrender. And that's how we win. If we get into running into battle and we're fighting ourselves, it's a mess. And a lot of people do that because the ego thinks they have to beat themselves up, beat themselves into enlightenment, I guess. Doesn't work. As you can see, a lot of different spiritual tools will do both self-care or self-work. I've been emphasizing that, and so there's a fluidity to it. Rest in general can be the most basic form of self-care, just resting on the couch, so not even meditating sometimes. Particularly for those people where meditation draws stuff up, then that's maybe what they end up doing. But if, meditation isn't drawing what's a lot of stuff up, then what you do is you meditate, and that's part of your rest cycle. Maybe you take a couple weeks. So if I'm speaking to somebody who's more on the conscious path, my energy isn't driving them to change in different ways, then you can take time off, because things aren't going to move unless you really go looking for them. When you're in awakening, you don't really feel like you have that kind of choice. So you just try to make it as easy as possible on yourself to surrender and to let things keep coming up when they want to, and honor how it works. Because the more you pay attention, you'll also find there's different kind of cycles that go through shifts. Initially, it's a mess. The dam breaks and there's energy everywhere. And you just feel kind of flooded. And getting your bearings in that deluge is a challenging time. But for those who do, you start to notice there's this kind of ebb and flow where things kind of pick up and you start to go into something, and the way your energy and your body and your emotions all respond starts to give you those cues. And because you've been paying attention, it's like, oh, it's time to slow down. So self-care is also making space, saying, all right, I'm not doing this extra thing. I'm going to get off this board of directors I'm on. I'm not going to volunteer for the PTA this week, or right, these types of things. Making space is inherently part of a good self-care. If you keep trying to apply the same ego ideas to yourself week after week when things are actually different for you, that's insanity. But people do that. They keep applying these ideas to themselves, saying, no, well, I should be able to still run my 5 miles this week. No, no, you're done with that. Maybe you're going on a gentle walk as part of your self-care to keep, things flowing and moving, helps the body rid itself of toxins. Walking is fantastic. You're noticing a theme of gentleness in a lot of self-care. But it's not to say, somebody who's working through different things, that at times working out actually is self-care. So more rigorous working out, the aerobic stuff, right? So that's less on the rest side of things, but it can be very much part of self-care when you've come out of something and you've got your physical energy back, and so you're helping to regulate yourself again. This regulated balance is so important. Human bodies, when they're imbalanced, it just is really an unhappy place. The working out, of course, could also be a kind of self-work for somebody who hasn't been in shape, and it will churn some things up. I just can't emphasize enough that this is about paying attention to yourself. You'll notice I haven't really talked much about doing anything with energy, and that's on purpose, because so much of what we feel or sense is defined by our bodies. And a lot of people are not very correct about their assumptions around what's energy and what's coming from themselves or what's coming from someone else. And that's a real problem, because if you start to blame the external world, which is what a lot of people do, say, well, this energy is imbalancing me, then you're going to be constantly battling the external world rather than understanding what choices are being made inside you. Because a lot of things that people think are energy are just unconscious associations that somebody has, and those unconscious associations pop up and say, I should feel bad. That person over there seems threatening. Their energy feels bad to me. And we do this so fast and so unconsciously sometimes that we just immediately assume that our conclusion is correct. The calmer you can help your body be through gentleness, nourishment, and things like that, the easier it is to be with energy and to correctly interpret it. Understand what's coming up. And at times, particularly for the highly sensitive person, when you start to notice that some things feel threatening, you go within more quickly. You say, oh, okay, what part of me feels threatened? What's happening in my body? What associations come up when I focus on this? Rather than focusing on the other person, you start to focus on yourself. So this is another form of self-work. by and large, the whole creating energy shields or worrying about spirits attacking you is such a small, tiny percentage. It's not really even worth talking about. It's just more exciting for most people's unconscious egos to say that there is this other negative force, right? It's something else. And some people do it to other people, they do it to places, they do it to jobs, they do it to energies. And it's the same thing. It's externalizing our feeling, saying an internal thing is being caused by something external. And when we do that, that impairs our self-care because we're now trying to address the wrong issue. And this is a blog post I wrote about sometime last year about focusing on wrong issues, wrong pain. You can search on that title on my blog and you can read about that. Making space, attending to the needs of the body, giving your space to physically rest. These are really important keys to spiritual self-care. And just in general, not doing spiritual work during those times when you're trying to care for yourself. Letting go of whatever tools are currently working for you on that plane. To just let things settle and get a sense of yourself. And then as the dust settles, you get clearer about what your next level of work is. It's no different than working out if you're getting in shape. You have rest cycles. Let the muscles rebuild and get stronger. And then you can kind of figure out, okay, this part of my body is stronger or this part is weaker. I need to work on this weaker part. The self-care gives you that space to notice. Of course, with awakening, when it keeps kind of moving through a lot of issues all at once, it's going to be hard at times to really rest deeply, which makes self-care even more important. If that energy is already working for you and helping you move through things, you do have to choose it, and you do find different tools to help support that. Absolutely. But it often is more important that you find ways to rest into that you make space for stuff to come up. And all this generally means changing a lot of your life. Making space for this transformation to arise. On that note, I'd love to hear some of your questions. And I see there's at least one already. And as I said earlier, please keep the questions and comments directed to me. It's a small space, and please keep them respectful. I'll answer intuitively. Down below in the information section, there's a way you can donate if you want to support this work. And thanks to all of you who have donated and who continue to donate. You guys make this work possible. Once I get to March, I'll officially have been fully financially supported for 3 years as a spiritual teacher. I'm really, really grateful. There are also some other links to an ebook as well as some other blog posts down below. Sophia is laughing at herself as being one of the spiritual workaholics. She asks, what happens when help becomes detrimental, like life coaching, resulting in getting infused with new age propaganda? Well, this is a great question in general, because what happens is we let go of our ego and let go of our own desire to hear things in certain ways. You get better and better at hearing the truth in any situation. Our ego self wants to hear certain stories, and so it likes to grab onto different beliefs and ideas in everything. Politics, spirituality, food, housing, everything, child rearing, right? And wants to kind of collect a bunch of safe ideas that will keep it safe and everybody else that it wants to keep safe, and so on. As we let go of that process, what starts to happen is we become more and more open to things that resonate, things that feel true, things that call to us. And that's a different thing than seeking safety. That just means that you can be with, somebody who's life coaching, who has a lot of new age ideas, and you start to find the piece that you need. Maybe it's not a big piece. And if it's too small for you, with somebody that you're working with, then you may stop working with them. But it becomes interesting as we open up more and more the different pieces of truth, the things that resonate in the most interesting ways. I remember having this conversation with, this man. I think he had a mental health issue, actually. I was sitting at this little tea bar in downtown, And even he could understand, that people get lost and they lose perspective. And it was such a beautiful thing that he kept saying perspective, and I think that was part of, the mental health issue. But, there was this piece of truth that I could hear. It's like, yeah, people really do get lost in ego and they lose perspective on what's actually going on. I wouldn't say, it was a major revelation because I've been doing this teaching for a while, but there it was in a situation that I wasn't seeking it from, but I was open to it so I could hear it. So that's kind of what happens over time as far as, any sort of ideas that other people are offering. The more open you are to whatever is real, and the less of your own ego agenda is there to block out some things and accept in other things, you start to hear more and more truth. Thanks, Sophia. So there's a question about pain and being around family. This once again, leads towards inner work. Your inner work on this is to find out why you're responding the way that you're responding. To pay attention to how you clench your body, the thoughts that are going on very quickly probably right now in your mind. And I would recommend journaling about it. You can write about, the types of topics and conversations that are being had to get a sense of the tenor of, what's being said and how you feel about it. You can notice how you're not saying what you want to say, or you're saying things just to be liked, or all these different things. When we're not responding from a place of truth and clarity in ourselves, those reactions have impacts because it also creates a sort of schism. A part of us will be like, I don't want to say that. And the other part says, I have to say it. And this, initially for a lot of people, is so blended together, we don't necessarily even realize that this is what's going on. We just feel tense in our chest when mom says something. So it's not about getting out of the pain, it's about learning from it. And that's a really important distinction that I just can't emphasize enough. That anytime this sort of pain comes when we're dealing with different things, and there's not like an actual physical thing happening, like somebody hitting us, then we want to start to look within, because most of our emotions are choices. So everything I just said is all about understanding those choices you're making, and journaling is one way, and breathing into the body and paying attention to it, and how you're clenching it, or the different emotions that come. That's all part of getting to know you. So Sophia says, yes, I did stop working with a coach and I'm okay with it. Thanks, Jim. You're wise and it resonates. You're welcome. You all have lots of wisdom inside of you. We're just trying to get the ego stuff out of the way so that you can hear it. It's just so simple. So there's a follow-up comment about the family and the pain. I notice when I defend myself before parents' comments, then pain arises. Right, so then you breathe into that, because a part of you is probably thinking unconsciously that you shouldn't argue with your parents or something like that. And you have to unteach that part of the body. You also want to pay attention to what's being defended, what's the particular topic. There's all sorts of different things to investigate to start to understand what's setting up this emotional, physical response inside of you. And the big thing, of course, is going within. That we're not blaming anybody's parents, not blaming anybody else. And some parents are really, truly atrocious. They have done physically bad things to their children. If somebody's still physically violent, of course, that's a situation to leave. Every now and then somebody has really gotten some very confused ideas about the spiritual path. Somehow, like, being open to all of life means we're going to endure every nasty situation that happens. But being able to leave situations where somebody's physically abusing us just kind of becomes obvious. It's like, if we can be in any situation around the world, why would we stay in the ones that are causing us pain if we have a choice? A lot of times the ego likes to take away our choice. But we do have a lot of choices. What else are on people's minds around self-care? Self-care does evolve too. Depends on what you're working on. There's a follow-up comment that's painful to accept parents the way they are. Well, that's part of love. True love is accepting what is. True love doesn't mean being a punching bag or being obligated. It just means you're accepting what's there. And the question, of course, is to wonder, why do we not accept? Right? So what is our ego objection? What is the ego trying to get that doesn't feel like it's getting? So that's more inner work. And another comment from Sophia. As a woman, I endured more pain because I had high tolerance conditions since childhood. Well, I'm not sure that it has to do with being a woman. I'm sure you're being specific to yourself, but a lot of people endure a lot of pain. Right? The pain of childhood and the different kinds of abuse that go on in life are really atrocious, particularly the things that happen towards children. Hurting the most vulnerable members of our society is just truly atrocious. But that happens when we're wounded, right? The more wounded people are, the more they just interact through hurting others. Adrienne says, thank you for the information. You're welcome. Self-care in another way is learning to be kind to ourselves. There's a whole lesson in that. And that's sort of more of that blending of spiritual work and spiritual care. Learning to be kind to ourselves. If you were not taught to be kind to yourself, you were taught to endure lots of suffering and pain and things like that, is a really, really important lesson. I have heard so many awful stories. It's just awful what's happened to a lot of people. But there is a way out. And that's part of the point of spiritual freedom, is a way out of our ego suffering, a way to let go of the attachments to old pain, a way to let go of attachments to current pain that we cause on ourselves to try and be somebody. There's a question, if true love is painful, so we must wait to grace to give us relief? No. I recommend going to my blog and, of course, on this YouTube channel on Jim Tools. There's a lot of topics about love. True love, when I use that term, is just pure acceptance. It's just pure acceptance of what is. Where the pain comes from is part of the investigation. We have to find out, where is this coming from inside of ourselves? And as I said, most of it is a choice. So we're not waiting for this to go away. We're understanding that we're choosing to be in pain, and we're going inwards to find out why. Why are we holding on to pain? Why are we making ourselves feel scared when we speak up, or sad if somebody, romantic partner, leaves our life? Right? That's a choice. People act like, if somebody leaves romantically that, they caused the sadness. They didn't. They just chose to be in a different experience, separate from you. But when we have so many cultural beliefs and an ego identity built around relationship, this is a sad thing. And we just are so used to inherently accepting it that we don't realize we've accepted it and we've made ourselves sad. The way we experience our emotions drastically changes the more inner work you do. But as I said, the self-care is about going within to let things calm down again, to kind of start to find out, what are our emotions like? How do they actually flow when we're not constantly yelling at ourselves to be happy or to be sad? If you go to a sports game and you care about the game, then you make yourself scared. That's what we call excitement, right? The excitement is hoping for an outcome we like. It's like, oh, my team's going to win. If you have no ego attachment to the game, then you don't care, right? Nothing happens to your emotions. And you can be in the exact same situation. Everybody else is excited. They threw a ball into a net. That's nice. But if you're attached, it's like, yes, the ball went into the net. It's amazing. It's all choice. That's all choice. And understanding that it's all choice is empowering. You're taking back power over how you feel. And you're not giving it to someone else. Sophia asks, could you comment on pain versus suffering? Sure. The general distinction between pain and suffering. Pain is like stubbing your toe. Suffering is like being angry that you stubbed your toe. So all ego suffering is choice. You can have prolonged pain, like going through chemotherapy, right? But if you can allow yourself to accept what's going on, to be at peace with it, then you aren't suffering. You're still in pain, but you're not suffering. Thanks for the questions, everything so far. If anyone is just joining me, I'm Jim Tolles, and we're talking about spiritual self-care during awakening. You can type your questions on that topic into the chat pod. If somebody has a question, hasn't asked it yet, feel free to do so. I usually do these talks every 2 weeks. I'm probably going to take a break and do the next one in 4 weeks, probably back at this 10:30 a.m. time. I really want to emphasize this empowerment thing, because we're really used to being disempowered by our own emotions, that we don't think we influence them. We think they happen to us. We say things like, someone made me sad. No one made you sad. From Pinar, as I'm going through the initial phases of awakening, I feel like I'm not getting aware with my searching. I feel like the search is another excuse blocking my way. Well, the search is always inside, so it just depends what you mean by search. If you mean you're going to lots of different spiritual things and reading lots of spiritual stuff or something like that, that's not necessarily helping. If you go to lots of these different things and you're bringing your attention inside and you're using those tools to understand yourself better about what you want and who you think you are, then it will. Another way that we externalize is we look for different events to make us happy or to give us stuff. Whenever any of you sit with me, I'm really not as interested in giving you wisdom as giving you tools that can take stuff away. To make this a practice of addition by subtraction, to see what's already within you and to peel away these rules about when you should be happy, when you should be sad. So maybe you can give me a better explanation, Pinar, of what's going on with this search and what you're trying to do. When awakening is really strong, so much work moves through us too that we don't necessarily need to add a lot of spiritual tools at that time in terms of doing work, other than some of the stuff that I talk about before, meditation, journaling, to help yourself understand. And it depends what you're processing. Processing emotions get processed emotionally. So if you're processing fear, that means you're feeling fear. I think that gets missed a lot. A lot of people probably hear the neutrality of that term processing. It's not a very exciting word, right? And that's why I kind of use it. But then they kind of think like, oh, wow, I'll just like go through and I won't feel anything. It's like, no, you're going to feel it all. That's part of processing, learning to surrender to it and letting go of attachment to it, not believing that you should be scared if you're feeling a lot of fear, for example. That's part of detaching. It's a feeling that's coming up through the body. And we're learning to neutralize our ego response. So the ego response is a voluntary response saying I'm upset. And the involuntary pain that's stuck, because it seems like energetically things get stuck inside of us. But when awakening starts pushing it up energetically, you start to feel that. If the ego decides that this is scary, then you've got the ego fear on top of the unprocessed fear. And so the surrender and the breathing and relaxing into things is about getting rid of that voluntary tension, getting the ego out of the way so you can start to work with the deeper one. Otherwise, people feel like they go through repeating issues again and again because they're too upset by the things that come up. There's a comment, we must always be searching for peace. This is primary, and if pain and suffering arising in this part, then part of our ways, but we must be focused on peace, is that transcendence. Well, the peace of awareness or true love, I call a lot of different words. Consciousness is already within us. Right? It's that space of awareness. Right now, as you sit here, all of you, as you sit here, a part of you is aware that I'm talking, a part of you is aware of thinking. That is the space of true peace. So there's no search for it. It's there. If you're hoping to get to a body experience that's always calm and feeling good, you will fail, because that's not what bodies do. Bodies change. So the search for peace, as far as this goes, is really more of an acknowledgement. And then what you're really looking for are all the ways that you cause yourself disturbance. Right? Your ego ideas about feeling upset about your family, that's you causing yourself disturbance. You're attached to them. You don't have to be. So if you let those go, generally speaking, a quality of peacefulness tends to be more present for us. So the search is really paying attention to your attachments, paying attention to all the ways that you cause yourself pain. And transcendence, I think we're going to leave that word alone. I have a blog post about that. You can search on what is transcendence at spiritualawakeningprocess.com. I feel like we're getting kind of far away from the self-care issue that I want to talk about today. But please go to the blog, read that topic, what is transcendence? From Rosalind. I feel the physical and emotional frustration with my grandson when he gets too hyper. I love him so much and would like to stay in peace no matter how he behaves. So pay attention to where you feel the frustration in your body. Breathe into it. Start to notice what's going on and explore. It's like, why do you need to control his experience? Certainly, you set boundaries for kids. Right? We don't have to be upset by setting boundaries. But that's basically what you do. From Mara, how do I actually feel love for self as a part of self-care? What do you mean love for self? You don't have to worry about the feeling. So when I talk about true love, it's different than the loving kindness that we usually discuss around love. Right? Most loving kindness is just conditional. It's just the ego says I like this thing or I don't like this thing, and then that becomes hate, love, hate. When I'm talking about true love, that space of awareness, it's just pure acceptance. That's it. Pure acceptance, purely neutral to everything. When you go to that space, everything else in the body, heart, and mind wants to relax. Doesn't mean it immediately will, but it will tend towards that, because most of the time we're upset and we're churning and we're feeling all sorts of different issues because we're involved. It's like we're trying to micromanage our whole experience all the time in a whole bunch of different ways. Even if we don't think we're managing it or managing it well, even if we feel like we're out of control. With that, I would encourage you to watch my video, Mara, about presence in moments of awakeness. It was another talk I gave several months ago, and it's on the channel, Jim Tolles. But just being in that space of awareness, that space of true love, whatever term we feel like using for it today, that just gives your body space to regulate itself and to let go, to surrender to whatever's going on. Thanks for everybody's questions and comments so far. And for those of you who have questions who haven't asked, please feel free to do so. Our time is getting short. And I think Mara is kind of pointing towards something that I haven't really touched on too much, but self-care is a form of love, of loving kindness to ourselves. And dropping into the space of awareness, the space of true love, is the kindest thing you can do. To just get out of the way and say, however I am right now is how I am. If we're looking for a particular feeling like peace or love, the good type of feeling, it's going to continue to elude you. It'll show up for a while and then it'll go away. It'll show up for a while and go away. And this fuels a lot of people's searches that I think Pinar was commenting on, and that can be really problematic. So the search for freedom, as I said earlier, is different than the search to feel good all the time. And there's a blog post I've written about that called How to Find Spiritual Freedom, and I recommend checking that out as well. A lot can go on after awakening, and there's a lot we don't know about ourselves. And this will be very humbling. For anybody who really, really embraces the spiritual path, you're going to find out a lot about yourself. You're going to find a bunch of stuff that you didn't think you had to deal with again, that you do. You're going to find a bunch of stuff that you didn't think was a problem that is. Like concepts around being attractive, concepts for men around having to prove themselves to be a man, all sorts of things. There are a lot of things that we are so used to accepting culturally as being okay that you will realize are not. And you'll realize how you've contributed to them and contributed to your own suffering. Sophia, is spiritual freedom living in congruence with our highest values? No, because the ego establishes the values. What usually happens as we let go of the ego and the suffering that it causes us is most people end up being very kind and loving naturally. They become humble and peaceful and compassionate. And it's such a beautiful thing because you really don't have to try as hard as like it seems that everyone else is trying. When we're in conflict with the ego and in conflict with our base desires, the lust, the fight or flight, and all that sort of stuff, being kind to another seems hard. It seems like we're not going to get what we want, or we're going to be hurt somehow. And of course, some people co-opt the whole being kind to others as a way to make themselves feel good about themselves. So a lot of our values are inherently corrupted. That's why coming to freedom is so important. Then it starts to be more clear what values are appropriate and when. There is an interesting upshot that the things that we typically value, as kindness and compassion, we do end up being aligned with that, but we're not holding on to it intellectually. I think that's a really key aspect of that. The way the ego has to hold on, no, this is the right thing, and then it will try to apply this idea to every situation. That doesn't work. Our situations in life are a muddle. Life is messy. It will put us in situations that are horrible, where the things that we think are right don't apply. It's like the idea of always tell the truth. It sounds good. And then the Nazis are knocking on your door and you're hiding Jews in your basement. And they say, are there any Jews here? And you lie. You're in congruence with the highest values in that moment, but you're lying. There's a fluidity to life. Spiritual freedom brings us into that fluidity. It takes us out of the rigidity of the right or wrong and trying to guess how to live life properly. It just doesn't feel that hard. Sophia says ego again. And everything I've talked about, all of you are perfectly able to access that space of awareness. All of you are perfectly able to go inside and to face the different attachments you have and to face the upset emotions. If you have a lot of trauma or if it's really challenging, please find support. You don't have to do it alone. There are some things you have to do on your own and some things that support is really helpful for. It's different for each of you. Creating the appropriate support mechanism is part of self-care. It's part of having enough space and assistance that you can fall apart appropriately and fall apart in the right way. We're not good at falling apart. We don't really understand it. So falling apart, and this is just something I've done with so many people and in so many ways, and I've obviously done it tons with myself, of learning how to fall apart into an issue, find out what's down there, go down in the well, go down in the mine and dig out some piece of junk, drag it out into the light and break it down. And when you do this, more space opens up, more clarity, and more of your own wisdom is there for you. Some of the questions you've asked, you will find your own answers to them. They'll probably be similar to mine, not in exactly my words, but they'll be truthful to you because they'll be yours. So I think we have time for one last question on self-care before we close. And for those who'd like to support me, as I said, there's a donation link down below. Your donations are greatly appreciated. It's how this work happens. Rosalind says thank you. She's glad you found me. Great. And I hope you enjoy the many other things that I have online. I also have an ebook for those who are interested and are really new to me. And there's a link to that down below. And Sophia agrees that we're not good at falling apart. Yeah, we're taught to hold everything together, right? Hold it all together. Make it through. It's like, make it through what? We're not on the trail trying to get to California together, where there are like all sorts of things that could kill us and cholera and stuff like that. Well, it doesn't look like anybody else has any questions today. So thank you all for joining me. Thank you for your honest and sincere questions. I appreciate it. I hope what I've offered can be useful to you and continue to guide you inwards so that you too can have a greater understanding of spiritual freedom. Take care, everyone. Bye.